you are able to connect with that person that you're interviewing, and all the other stuff in the room kind of disappears.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's part of the skill of what we all kind of instinctually have as journalists.
Yeah. And when I was a TV news reporter, which was a great training ground to be a documentary producer, because you have multiple deadlines a day, and you're essentially doing a miniature documentary every day.
Yeah.
That's one. And so you really learn how to hone your interview skills, and you really learn how to become organized because you got to save time. You don't have very little time. And so when you go into longer format, that's a really good skill set to have, I think. But in talking about interviewing, I ran across in television news, and I'm not going to mention anybody by name, but people are just terrible interviewers. They would step on answers, they would be pushy, and I think it's really key, to ask open-ended questions and let people talk, and listen to what they say, so you have follow-up questions to what they said, and not just run down a list of questions. Yeah, it is. It's getting very difficult. Jamie,
I was just going to say, I think that's more, again, where I'm so used to that, and people will get tripped up in something because it's so close to their heart, regardless of what the subject is, that there are just ways you learn to navigate that, pivot a little bit, they'll come back to it. They don't know that they're going to come back to it, but they will come back to it, and you just got to listen for that, and then take care of them a little bit as that's happening, so that there's an open space for them to come back to. And I think that timing has a lot to do with it too, within the context of your project. And for us, with it being a criminal justice case and nobody knew how it was going to end, all of our interviews in the beginning, and we were so fortunate that the family of Gregg Taylor allowed us to come in this really traumatic time, but a ton of emotion had been built up for 17 years. And what we really got was like after the fact, then people had gotten used to us being around, and Gregg Taylor had told his story so many times, it became canned. You could hear that they already knew what to say. So I think timing, depending on what your subject is so important, and being able to get that passion if there's something that's questionable about your subject, or there's some decision that's going to be made about a project that's environmental, and will we win this, those kind of things are important to get that before and after, but knowing that after, you're not even going to come close to kind of some oomphiness in the interview. And I know that in one piece of our project, you literally can listen to for that last line, like we knew one person that we interviewed, and it was chaotic in her house, the baby's crying, all this kind of stuff. She was the sister of the murder victim, who was actually on the side of our guy who'd been in jail for 17 years, had come full circle. But there was a moment where all of a sudden she says the line that we didn't know we needed. And so you need to listen for that too. And it was like walking out the door, it was like, this was it. This is the end of the film right here. And then that helped us in some ways to formulate a little bit of other things that we needed to make that work at the end. So there's so much more to it than just talking and listening. I think it's really knowing where do you want to take that interview. I personally don't like to tell a person too much about what we're going to ask them. It's more like just a general, we really just want you to know that we know how important this is to you, and we really kind of want to hear that. And then like you said, we sit down in the beginning, and we don't go over all the questions, but I'm like, we're going to kind of do this, and how do you feel about it? And if they're already being a little tricky, we'll just see if it comes up, because really people do want to say things, and I think you can trust that, but without pushing too much. So.
I know one thing for us too is we want that organic response. We don't want it to be kind of canned. We want to get them just giving their honest opinions and honest feedback.
Well, just the one thing I want to say about this is that you're building a relationship. Particularly if you're self-funding. I mean,
which we were.
But I mean, they're going to show up at your premiere. Depending on who it is, they might watch one of your rough cuts. And in our case, it took us 8 years to do this. I mean, and it was, we talked to these folks a lot, and you can't go in and make it a transactional deal. I want to come in and you're going to tell me stuff. It's going to go on for a long time, and maybe they'll raise some money for you.
Yeah, and, I've had people question, well, why won't you give them the questions in advance? Or have, especially if you're dealing with corporate types, that you're interviewing somebody in the corporate world, they always want the questions in advance, or their PR person always wants the questions in advance, and I don't ever give the questions. And I say, well, I'm not going to give you the questions in advance, but I'll give you the general areas that we want to talk about. And why is that? And the reason is because you have to maintain objectivity, and there's an editorial line there. So if you give them all the questions that you're going to ask them, they're going to rehearse. So you're helping them with you're getting them to help you with your production, essentially, and then the editorial line is gone. It's just gone, because they're going to rehearse that, they're going to come up with canned answers, and you're not going to get that sincerity that you were talking about and that raw feeling and emotion, because they've got all, and they've practiced it and they've rehearsed it, and it won't come out as true.
Well, and that's the big difference to me between documentary work and your corporate work. The other aspect of that is I want that truthfulness that they express without it being cut over or filtered over, whereas with a corporate project, I can guarantee with some people that I'm interviewing that I'm going to be recreating what they're trying to say out of everything that they said so that it's a smooth thing, but it's not what they actually spoke. They sound better than they actually do. But I can cover all that with B-roll, and I can make
the audio edits.
Yeah, exactly.
Cut out the stumbles and the repeated words.
That's the whole idea behind a corporate piece,
Yeah.
but because they want it to be perfect,
Right, yeah.
It's easier to kind of show that emotion and the rawness with the documentary. That's what you're after, because that's what people are going to relate to, I think.
Yeah, interviewing is so important, and Jane, you brought up a good point about, coming back to something that was earlier in the interview, later in the interview, and one of the techniques that I use that, especially if you get like somebody who's, the corporate type who's got their rehearsed lines, or you get the academician who's just talks so technically,
for 25 minutes.
and bureaucratic jargon you can't understand. So what I do is, like, if I don't really get what I feel like I should have gotten out of the response, I'll come back to it later and rephrase the question in a different way.
Or after they've gotten more comfortable.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times they're like,
that is a good
they're
point, yeah.
tight at the beginning, and you'll ask that important question, and their answer is tight, but if you circle back after they become more comfortable and relaxed and they've forgotten about everything that's going on, then you really get a better answer.
And also, when they give you, the canned answer or an answer you don't understand, it is totally fine to say, what did you mean by that? I don't really understand. Or if it's a real complicated, like a lawyer type response, explain that to me like I'm your grandmother.
Yeah, exactly.
There's lots of little tools you can use to kind of help, get both sides get what they want out of the interview.
And Jamie, you were mentioning, coming back to like some of those canned answers, and you can kind of see them coming. Gregg, from your standpoint, when you're editing that out, you're looking at all this and putting the puzzle together. You probably have already got instances where you've captured what maybe makes a more impactful statement than what came there at the end. Is that something that you look for?
I'm not quite sure what you mean, but I look for natural answers.
What do you mean by that?
The thing that popped into my head when you were saying that is 98% of what everybody says is about themselves, and the 2% will address your real problem. So that's the challenge.
Yeah, and finding that and then incorporating it into your overall storyline. Yeah.
And I think also, listening is important. Don't step on people's responses. Mm-hmm. Let them talk. But when you get to the end of the interview, I think one of the most important things you can do is ask them, is there anything else you want to talk about, anything else you want to say? Don't presume that you knew everything to ask them, because so many times I've done that, and they start on a different tangent that I didn't even know about, think about, and you get some really good stuff, you know, because you can't presume that you know it all.
I never
you know,
turn the camera
right?
off,
And
man. I keep the
Yeah,
camera
yeah.
going.
Yeah, just keep it going.
They
and let it
walked
go,
away
right?
off, because you can always get a nugget, you know, that you didn't expect.
Yeah.
I'm sure y'all see that
That-
working together too.
That's some of what the homelessness thing is, you know, cameras were rolling, and I think everybody else didn't fully understand that, because it was supposed to capture everything, but there's some stuff they captured that is like, okay, well, we'll see if we use this. So-
And there's one other thing that happens every once in a while is, particularly in a shorter form piece, is you interview 5 or 6 people, and I walked out of one interview thinking the whole thing was a waste. And when I got back and started to put it together, that was the interview that held the whole piece together. And, you know, so there is some advantages to sitting on things before you edit them, because you'll change, you know, when you look at the whole picture, it's just way different.
Yeah. Yeah.
That doesn't happen a lot, but that one time it surprised me a lot.
And, you know, it's kind of back to that plan A, plan B, you know, have a plan, but don't be rigid with your plan.
Yeah.
You know, just have a plan so you can be somewhat organized and achieve, you know, what you hope to achieve, but you have to flux when things change. And sometimes what happens during an interview is you don't get what you expect. You know, you've done your research on this
More
person.
times than not.
Yeah, exactly. And they'll say something in the course of the interview that you go, oh, we need to follow that track.
Yeah.
And that will change that interview, but more often than not, it may lead to other interviews that maybe you hadn't thought about. Oh, you know, that's a good point. I need to interview so-and-so about that, you know, so put them on the interview list for this project, you know. So that's back to listening. Listening is so important.
Oh, absolutely.
Listen closely. Anything else you want to say about interviewing?
It's the most important part of the process until you start editing.
Or
until you start doing something else. But yeah, I mean,
or logging. And I actually log kind of the old-fashioned way, and I log, you know, in Adobe, where I'm creating the video clips as I choose them to put in my script from the interviews. And people say, well, you know, I have done on longer projects, send it out for transcription. Or now you have transcription programs built into your editing software and other types of, you know. But the problem with the transcription, it only tells you what they said.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you how they said it. And so if you just send it off for transcription, which I know a lot of people do, but I just, you know, and I end up finding myself going through a transcript and then having to, you know, I pick, well, that looks good. Now go back to the interview. How did it sound? I end up spending just as much time personally doing that as if I just go through it myself and just transcribe the sections I want to use and paraphrase the rest. I don't know what do you all do when you have interviews? Do you transcribe it, log it yourself, or?
It's all logging for us, you know, because we're small, you know.
Yeah.
So it's just going through it, and the more that I listen to it, the more I understand it, the more I start to hear that voice, and the easier it is for me to find my storyline. So
I am so with you on that, because I find listening, you know, when you're shooting the interview and you're the interviewer, there's a lot going through your mind.
Yeah.
You know,
You're operating on 2 levels.
Exactly. You're listening to your interview subject and you're trying to take that in, and you're also thinking, and I don't know if y'all do this, but I'm automatically thinking, oh, I can use that at this point in my project. And, you know, it's hard to, you know, you've got all these things going on in your head, but you're also trying to be focused on the interview. But when I go back and watch it again, when I'm logging it, I catch things that I totally missed when I was actually sitting there. Do you the same? Y'all have that?
Even just a little delay in the headphones. If you're listening in the headphones, and there's a lot to think. I always wonder whether they're out of frame, because you know, because you can't really see it, and undoing that gets to be rude.
oh yeah.
That's
Yeah, I mean, when I assume we're shooting the same way.
Yeah.
You're doing your audio, you're doing your lighting, you're doing your camera work, you're asking the questions. So I'm trying to, it's like watching the mirrors when you're driving. You've got a lot going on, but somehow you keep focused on the road. That's what shooting an interview is
And
like.
then you're trying to think of what the next question is.
Oh, absolutely. So there's a lot going on up there when you're doing this, because you're trying to watch and make sure that everything's staying in its lane. So.
Well, and a lot of times while Gregg is setting up is when I'm spending that time with the person off camera. We say we're just chatting right now, just getting you oriented. I want you to know it's an actually dynamic thing, even though it's just you and me sitting here like this and Gregg's right there. But I said there'll be times where I'm going to say, that was great, or I'll be doing like this. And I want you to know that when there's something that you're giving us that's actually so important that we might stop a minute later just so we can have you talk about that longer. And then I'll also say there's times I'm going to turn around, I'm going to ask Gregg questions like, did you hear something that we needed to go back to, or what are we missing right now? And so I think the person feels somewhat prepared that we're dealing on different levels, but being able to give them some cues that we are going to go back, or we're doing this, it sets a stage for them to feel like they're going to be taken care of in it, as well as give you more, like we might want more. Let them take a breath, and then they're going to get it. So capturing that sense of a little bit of safety, but and you're going to keep being able to talk. So we don't usually back interviews. That's another thing for me. We usually don't back interviews, like super back to back with people, just because they want time. Once they get into it, they want time, and you still may catch that one thing that they weren't giving you in the beginning if you keep giving them a little more time. So that interview process is big.
It was going to answer. Just to finishing up, because I've got somebody working on it, a fundraising video for the community care center in Winston, and the client was really busy and has a new job. I tried to have everything transcribed in Adobe, and some of it came out in Greek. I mean, it was like horrible.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So Rev.com, 25 cents a minute for AI.
Yeah.
And that saved our butts.
Yeah.
I usually don't do that, but that was.
It's interesting, Jamie, what you said about stopping the interview, I guess, to turn around and talk to Gregg. And I think one thing that does is it makes the person realize that I don't have to be perfect. That you don't want to coach your interview subject and cross that editorial line, but you also want to make them feel comfortable. And if something, people can be obviously really nervous in interviews too. And if something comes out that's just gibberish, because they're nervous, or do they just human and stumble, and they had a hard time, give them a do-over. Say, hey, do you want to repeat that? I saw you stumbled there a little bit, or it seemed like you had a little trouble expressing that. We got plenty of time, so if you want to try
I heard
again.
something in my earphones there. We need to go back and
Yeah.
again.
Right.
Yeah.
So you don't want to cross the line of coaching, but at the same time you want to make sure that they are able to articulate what they want, and as a result you get what you want too.
Especially in a document.
transactional, but
Yeah,
it's
you
a-
really
but
want
that's-
that.
And the other thing that I found about logging interviews is not only do you have a chance to see the interview again and pick out things that you may have missed, but it helps me understand sometimes about the other visuals I need that maybe I didn't think about.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he brought up, or she brought up, this thing, this place, or this object, or this thing in history. I need to find a visual for that, and I'll make a note of that too on our shot list.
Right.
We need to, because they reference this, we need some kind of visual of that. So, which I'm not doing so much during the interview, when I'm actually doing the interview. So really, I end up doing that more, in logging the interview. So, anything else about interviewing? So you brought
You're
up.
doing a good job.
Yeah.
So, well, I take tips. I have a tip jar here, but you brought up, just the small teams that you are, and I was a small team too when I was at Capitol doing that. It was just me and Jay Jennings. But we had we had a lot of resources around us. So we had a graphics guy, if we needed graphics done. We had a huge tape archive. a wonderful, archival news events and different things over decades. And, at our fingertips. So that was a nice help. But, I would tell people that, we produce all, and it's just you and that other guy. And I said, yeah, but we have resources around us, a helicopter, and we had
somebody who can fly a drone.
we had a drone pilot when we got our first drone, and they had one guy, flying the drones, and, they quickly realized that, well, everybody needs to have a drone, because when the price came down, because, they're always fighting for the one drone and the pilot, the news people and us, and your creative people. But, different, and I've worked with teams that, in a few instances where they've got like 6 people in the crew, and I'm like, where do you get all this money? It's like kind of crazy. Yeah. So talk about like how you operate, and who do you collaborate with to get the project done? Is it just you and
it's just
you and
Cher and myself. And early on, we knew we wanted to add drones to our work. So at the time I was in corporate communications, finishing up a position there, we knew we were going to move. We were starting our company, and we saw what was involved with getting a license for that. And luckily, thankfully, she stepped up and became our Part 107 pilot. And so she is our drone pilot. She is our aerial cinematographer. I had a background in filmmaking by chance. It started way back when we sliced and diced on regular film back at University of South Carolina. Probably some of the same classes you had, because we were there about the same time.
I remember the videotape machine that had the big suitcase, the 3/4 inch
the
machine.
Beta?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember
Or
the
you
first
had
one
it.
coming
I think it
across
was-
the campus trying to lug
first
that
one was a
thing,
3/4.
Once again, showing that we're very old.
Yeah.
Yes, unfortunately. But, how things have changed, but taking, I had the very good fortune of working with a production company. I was working in hospice as a corporate communications director, and everything was in print, and it was like, this is not the way to tell these stories. And so they gave me the latitude to create an in-house production company to tell our stories visually and on video. And I initially worked with a production company, and then they were so generous. They loved what we were doing. And so I would take time off from work, and I would go and spend my days with them. And that's how I learned to edit and really get my chops down on how to work the technical side. I already had a good representation with my training, but that really allowed me to hone my skills. And so I was able to just basically build off of all my skills that I had. Everything kind of came full circle from 30 years before. And Cher took on the aerials, she took on the second camera, and we just made it all work. So yeah, we're self-contained, we do everything with just 2 people. So.
Very cool.
You guys the same pretty much, or similar?
I'm not a graphic designer, so I'll put in, when we raise money, we'll go hire somebody.
Actually, I hear that. I say it's different. It was like, for that big project that we had, from a fundraising standpoint, which a lot of people want to know about that part, it was just that the fact that we needed to then, after all these years, we knew the next phase was coming. Color correction and original music and all this kind of stuff. Well, that made it easier for us to finally go to the community and say, we have gone as far as we can go with our skills. We need a graphic designer because aesthetics is not his thing, that's for sure. So it's kind of like, okay, great. We can say we need help and we need you to help us because we ain't got it to do this. We do not have the funds for this. And that actually made it easier to go to people and do events, seeing the rough and going, oh, I can picture what this is going to look like once all these other things are finally added to help pull it all together. And if you would like to be a part of that, then that's what made a difference in us being able to ask. Because we're not that good asking for us.
Yeah, I'm terrible.
We're great asking for the cause, you know, and we raise money for nonprofits and stuff. I mean, we're known that we can raise money, but when it was us, it was tougher. And so teams, I think too, is like we knew we needed a fiscal sponsor to be able to say your donation to this project will be tax deductible. So that was a big team player for us. I thought it made it so much easier because you're not giving money to just Gregg and Jamie.
Right.
And then the graphic designer was a huge piece for us because the story didn't require a lot of bells and whistles like you see in a lot of video. But the middle piece was all about how this particular body was formed in North Carolina, and it's dry information, but it's the key to the whole story. It's what made our story precedent-setting for the nation. So while we had some people say you need to take that out, we're like, no, because this is the heart of the story. So we needed graphics in order to help kind of pick that up, all the legal dry stuff, and yet we knew you couldn't have graphics that were overproduced for the film too, like because the production quality of our film is kind of low compared to what you would see if Ken Burns did his films or something, but we needed something that was jazzy enough. So the graphic designer for us, that was tricky, and the communication, and I was the one who kind of had some idea more what we wanted it to see, so I'd say, Gregg, he's got it, Jonathan's got it, finally. But we weren't sure, and we know a lot of people in town, and so then it gets tricky with your team member too. It's like, okay, don't want to trash this relationship. And we had a couple of false runs with our composers too. A couple of people that did stuff, and we're like, nope, can't do that. So it's interesting who you pick as your team members. I think it's critical, and if you're lucky to have people who are already, major pros and are doing this is all they do, that's one thing. In our case, we were trying to support some other people who we knew were in the music business, but maybe hadn't, fully said they composed for a film, but let's give you a shot. So there's so many layers. Yeah, so many layers of who your team members can be if it's not full professional team behind you. So.
But the production part of that, we did do all ourselves.
Yeah. I've always taken, it depends. I mean, I've done some small stuff all myself. I can shoot and I can edit. But on the bigger projects, when I was doing independent work, and I'm kind of back doing that now, trying to raise money for a project. But I do have a fiscal sponsor, so that's good. And I'm married to a grant writer, so that's even better.
And I tell people, we're lucky, we're old. Our friends have money.
Yeah, right.
As opposed to
none of my friends have money.
Younger people, maybe not.
Yeah, younger people.
Maybe not so much.
Yeah.
But so I always those bigger projects I would have go-to people that I work with, because can I do it all myself? Yeah, but I'd rather focus on conceptualizing, doing what a producer does, conceptualizing the project, finding the people to interview, scheduling all that, figuring out what the visuals are going to be, doing the interviews, doing the writing. I think that writing is really my strength. And then I'll find, I would just have go-to people, there were 2 shooters that I worked with regularly. So they understand how I operate, I understand how they operate, and we're a great team. And then I would often take it somewhere. I knew 2 editors, and I would give it to one of them to do the editing. And then if I needed graphics, I would, find a graphics person, and then just kind of pull it all together. But it's if you can afford to do that, it's great, because it's nice to have the luxury of, having a photographer that's all he does, and he knows how to use his gear, he knows how to troubleshoot his gear. An editor who knows every trick, in the book, in Adobe Premiere. It would take me forever to learn all that and to do it all myself, So, on projects where you have a little funding and a little time, it is nice to assemble that team of people.
We've never had that luxury.
Well, it's kind of like building a house, you can do it yourself.
Yeah.
Should you? I don't know. But anyway, so I think a couple more things, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. I think they wanted us to do that close to 10, and we're getting pretty close to that. Talk about, and you already talked about a little bit, Jamie, you did, brought up the impact that documentaries can have. How do you see that, the positive impact that doing documentary work can have on communities and society? Okay, I guess there isn't any. But
I think
There's no
it's very challenging these days to have an impact. And clearly in your community of the people that have been involved or know about your project will want to see it. I'm on a chat group or something called D-Word, it's a documentary professionals chat group. And they're very active. I think it's 15 or 17,000 members worldwide. And a lot of them are complaining that as the industry has changed from 2 television stations to this whole plethora of streaming, you'd think there was a lot more access, but there isn't anymore. Even these people on D-Word are saying they can't get their short screen anywhere anymore. Film festivals have all become kind of hyper-specialized, and unless you fit exactly what they want, you're not going to get it seen. So having an impact is hard.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think on one hand, having all these platforms out there, there's more demand for content, and so more more opportunities to get your work out, and it can still be challenging. But then the other side of that coin is there is so much, and it's like your project, if you're able to get it on one of them, can get lost, and all that. Yeah. So I think maybe the key to that, and I don't know, I'm discussing is kind of niche, picking niche topics and finding niche things that are not, true crime, or not out of the what's selling on the mainstream platforms, and finding something that is nobody's doing, and maybe that's the key.
Or even if they are, making sure that what you do has a way to stand out, because a lot of people are dealing with water quality, but we found a niche, and how does that affect these fisheries in North Carolina in particular? But it's applicable across the world. I mean, the subject matter that we talked about just keeps popping up in news story after news story after news story. So we know that we hit upon something there. We keep going back to what else is there for us to maybe go after and try to expand this a little bit more and broaden it more so that it's not just specific to here, but truly take in that whole global aspect.
And, it's not just necessarily a niche topic, but a niche audience, and those may be kind of the same, but not completely. So, everybody wants their product to be seen, by as many people as possible. But I used to believe when I worked in TV news, of course you think what you're doing is important, and I always thought, I wanted to have really good standards, and, if one person saw it and it changed their mind about something or opened their eyes about something, that was enough for me.
You were successful.
So maybe, maybe that's the key for independent documentary producers, is just finding the right audience and not necessarily always being the big general audience.
We've been very fortunate in that when we have been in festivals, a lot of times because of our subject matter, they will pull in somebody from the local college or something to talk, or and once they see it, they've actually been using it as part of their curriculum now, which is like, that was so great cool for us,
I had the same experience with, we had a documentary series at WRAL for a long time, and I taught a class at Duke in television journalism for 9 years, and I would have students come to me and say, I saw one of your docs in one of my other classes. And I was going, what? And that is so cool, and I didn't even know, And I had because they're all online, I had a teacher, I can't remember what the university was, out in somewhere in California, say, I'd like to show your documentary in my class. Could I do that? And I'm like, it just blew my mind, And it made me feel so good, and I was so proud of it. So, did 100,000 people see the documentary? No. But this one class at this college, is going to, these students are going to see it, and it might make a difference and make them think about something, So I was thrilled, just delighted. So I know what you mean, yeah.
And of course you charge them for it.
Yeah, that's right. I wish I could.
Yeah, I don't think we've made anything that was designed to have to be in film festivals, but with the criminal justice one, while every wrongful conviction story, freed prisoner story is moving, that was why we knew this one was different, because it was a precedent-setting case, and we could not leave that middle part out. We couldn't, because as we kept saying, this is the reason to do this. And so there is that aspect of what is it you really want it to be doing. And then we had thought that law schools would teach from it and so forth. But we have another piece that we keep having false starts on, and we're going to lose our subject if we keep waiting too long, because she's in her 80s. But there's, they always say, don't just pick somebody you love and then do a story on them, because everybody has somebody they love. So she's 86, and she is a lesbian, and she is a French teacher, and she is an accomplished poet, and she has been an activist like nobody's business, and she's the most diminutive, calm, kind of quiet person that you would never suspect. So, and from the South. And so one of the things is that, yes, we don't want to lose her as a friend and the importance that she has as just a human being on the planet, but how would we do this that's different from a million other stories you see about an interesting person who's led an interesting life? And so we keep watching a lot of shorts right now to see how people are dealing with those, and that, I think, too, is studying that. Like, what is it you think you want to do, and watching what somebody else has done with it, and go, that's all sweet and that's nice, but this is, that was the hook right there. And so it is those choices of, how are you going to narrow down what you want to use? And for us, I think I know where this would have some traction, but that's not the reason for making it. But if you don't take that into consideration, you're going to miss the boat on something too. So, I think I know the lane where we want to try to use that. So that's, I think, important.
Yeah.
And get your expectation right, because you're not going to make money.
Yeah, we're not trying to make our living from from films. You guys are, I think, in a different boat. We're not trying to make our living that way, but everything we're going to take our precious time and energy and put behind it, we'd like for it to have some meaning, and have somebody see it in any way that it determines that it has use for.
I know that you always hope that your documentaries, lead to positive change, but you never really know sometimes, because you don't know somebody watching it in a classroom, watching it at home, watching it wherever, when they walk out of there, and is that going to change something about them? Is it going to make them want to become an advocate for something or somebody? And you just don't know most of the time. And a lot of times when you're trying to deal with a client or align with a nonprofit, the first thing they want to know is, well, what kind of results are we going to get out of this? And that's a really hard question to answer. You hope you're going to get results, and there's going to be some positive change, but public awareness is a hard thing to measure.
Yes.
And the impact of public awareness is a hard thing to measure.
But this medium is the most impactful. So that's one thing that Sharon and I always come back to, is that this is the most important way that you could present your subject. It's going to be the most emotive. It's going to be the thing that connects with people the strongest.
I know, you just, it's a hard question to answer. So when someone's, is giving money to your project, well, what am I going to get in return?
Thank you.
Thank you. The satisfaction that, you may change some minds, you're going to educate some people about this issue, you're going to raise public awareness that can lead to legislative changes, policy changes. And some of our docs, at WRAL led to some minor legislative changes and put pressure on politicians and public officials to do things. And, that was always gratifying. But it's such an intangible, You know it's the right thing to do to tell this story and get it out there, and you know it's going to impact people, but you can't always say tangibly, well, it's going to do X, Y, or Z.
Right.
For sure. You know, you just don't know. So.
We had a attorney who was in our film, also lives in Winston, and he was very involved in the Darryl Hunt case. And Darryl was one of the first exoneration stories, but he told me one day, he said back then, and he was exonerated in the early 2000s, I think he said, it took a film to get somebody out. You know, so there was this whole group who made a story about Darryl's case, and and it helped get him out of prison.
Yeah, I remember.
And having that kind of impact these days in that particular world doesn't really matter anymore.
Yeah. So, any advice for novice documentary filmmakers just getting started? Just tips, advice, words of wisdom?
I don't know where I put my phone. Well, here it is, but this is a very good tool you can start with.
Yes.
You don't need to have
You
all
can shoot and
of
edit
the best equipment in the world.
You just need a story.
Yeah.
And they're all around us.
That is true, and I think the other thing too, that's a good point about the phone. The technology has made filmmaking accessible to anybody and everybody. What separates the good from the bad is the ability to use it.
Yeah.
How do you use it correctly in a way that translates into a good program that people want to watch.
And that takes practice.
That takes practice and knowledge and skill and all
Instinct.
That. Instinct.
Yeah.
Any other tips, advice?
Patience.
Patience, yeah.
Have a second job.
Sometimes a third one.
Unfortunately.
Yes.
Unless
I
your
spend
job,
way too much time in this place.
that's why I felt so fortunate to actually, for at least 17 years of my career, be paid to produce documentaries.
Yeah.
So,
Very
it was a hard job to say when it was offered. I was like, yes, I'll do that. And
And those jobs are around.
They are. You do give up a little freedom. There is that. You have bosses that have certain expectations. It's not like I'm just going to go do my own thing. People said, well, do you get to, when I was in that job, do you get to do the documentaries that you want to do? And it's like, no, not really. I do the documentaries I think our audience wants to see, or that sometimes we had a very altruistic owner of the company at that time who he saw the documentary unit as a vehicle for positive change in the community and the state. And so he wanted to tackle tough topics. And I loved that. I just thought that was great. It was what I always wanted to do when I was working in television news. And that job didn't exist when I was working in television news. But it was just, I eventually left the job, but sometimes I miss it because now I'm back in that independent world. But I'm like, I really want to do this documentary, but how do I get the money to do it? Yeah. So, Deborah, write that grant.
Yeah.
So, all right. So I want to open it up for Q&A. Questions, anybody?
We can see you.
Well, on that vein, do you ever have the opportunity to sell your documentary back to your former media or that sort of resource?
I have not personally. I don't know that, when I left, they replaced me, so I probably can't sell anything back to them. But I don't know. Any of you had an experience where you've actually sold a documentary?
We have a distributor that, I think it's been out for 5 years and we've probably gotten $4,000 worth of checks. But that's not what you meant.
No, I was just thinking that might be an untapped market because as different venues reduce their cost, being able to pick something up that's already produced and has value.
Yeah, that's a really good thought. I haven't personally had any experience doing it.
I did in the early 2000s, 3 years with doing the corporate synopsis for the Golden Leaf Foundation.
Right.
And I sent them an email and asked them if they wanted the footage and haven't heard anything back. I'm thinking because it was a very specific time and we did a wide variety of calling up the North Carolina cultural whatever resources thing. But yeah, I doubt they'd pay for it.
Yeah.
But I just think it's valuable
PBS
stuff.
or any of those?
I did sell a little independent doc I did about 20 years ago to PBS NC, then UNCTV. and they paid me an acquisition fee for it, but it was not even close to covering the actual production costs of the project.
I was thinking more in terms of kind of a mutually beneficial exposure as well as maybe some money.
Yeah,
I don't know.
haven't
Yeah.
looked that way.
I haven't either.
Welcome to documentary world.
But I will say
It
that,
might work.
I will say that, when you're raising money to do a documentary, you have a production budget. Your production budget does include you,
Yeah.
so that you
Was that how you do it?
Yeah, right. So like when I do up a production budget, I budget for me and my time. I end up putting way more time into whatever I budget for. I budget for the photographer's time if I'm hiring a photographer, so all that's in the budget. So, when you align yourself with a nonprofit organization, say to be your fiscal sponsor, and you're applying for grants through them, and they take the money in, and they've got to, I'm invoicing them for me, my time, my crew that I hired, if I hired any crew. And so that's kind of how you don't get paid a lot, it just depends, I guess, how much you're able to raise and how much you think your time's worth, and how you're able to sort that out. But so that's kind of the way I've approached independent projects, rather than I'm going to make this and try to sell it. But now you're in that world where you can sell things to the streaming services, but you need a distributor. We did a documentary on the James Jordan murder case that was distributed to Amazon. Well, did we try to sell it to Amazon ourselves? And when I say we, I mean, I was actually doing it for Capital Broadcasting Company, the parent company of WRAL. And so we weren't actually in WRAL producing it as a WRAL product. But they realized that they weren't even, I mean, it's a decent sized company, but they even realized that they were really players in that world. So they approached Bow and Arrow Entertainment in Los Angeles to get it onto, get it sold to one of these streaming platforms, and they did. They got it sold to Amazon, who premiered it on their IMDb channel, and also Amazon Prime, and I think now it's on Freevee. So the company I was working for got a nice check, and Bow and Arrow Entertainment got a nice check. Clay didn't get anything other than what I was paid to produce it from the company I was working for. But that's a world I'm trying to learn about. Because I want to do a couple independent docs, and I'm working on one now, and I've already been thinking about, how am I going to get this out there once it's done? I mean, I think it's going to go through the kind of the old PBS route, where PBS NC will premiere it and then distribute it to PBS National and their various distribution platforms. So once I get the money raised, and I'll pay myself some out of that, then it'll get distributed through PBS, but I won't get any more money after just what I got paid to produce it. And I was talking to my old boss about that, and it's just weird how, you'll see a series on one platform, and suddenly it's on, being picked up by another platform, but the people, the writers and the producers don't get any of that money when it's sold to the next platform. Like I helped produce a series on PBS. It was like when I first started freelancing in the late 90s, and it was called Historic Hotels of America. It was a syndicated PBS thing, and I was a producer-writer, and the guy that I was work for hire, so I was working for an executive producer, and so he got it underwritten and got it on PBS, and then he turned around and sold it to the Travel Channel. Again, Clay didn't get anything. But he got a nice chunk of change, and it was on the Travel Channel for a few years, and then I just don't know whatever happened to it. And I was going through some old tapes and DVDs and stuff in my office trying to clean it up, and I came across a Historic Hotels of America VHS tape. And I was like, I wonder where is that? Is it still alive somewhere, 20 plus years later? And so I searched for it on my Amazon Fire Stick, and it's running on Apple TV.
Oh my gosh.
It's still, and it's so dated. I mean, some of those hotels probably don't even exist anymore. And I'm like, how does that work? And who got paid?
And that would be why there's strikes.
Yes, that's what I was saying.
That's exactly right. Because somebody's making money, but it's not the people who actually did the production to begin with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's tough.
So, any other questions?
One thing,
After that kind of non-answer, I guess you're afraid that these people don't know
You all
anything.
talk about a story a lot and things, but nobody said anything about entertainment. And you're giving me that look. You're not supposed to be entertained by a documentary?
Oh, gosh.
No, you can be entertained. One of my favorite documentaries that I ever saw was called Speedo. And it was about a guy on the demolition derby, not that Speedo.
Sorry, that's
Not that Speedo. But it was about this guy who was on the demolition derby circuit, and he would go every weekend and do a demolition derby event. And it was hugely entertaining, but it was a pure documentary, it was just telling his story.
But what about, I guess Netflix, the one they've done on Formula One, they've done one Chef's Table, and one about the tennis players. I don't know, I think it's pretty amazing, pretty entertaining, because the perspective that they take and the stories that they tell with it. And you talk to people and they're watching these things. It's not, always when you used to hear a documentary, it was like, oh, PBS, Ken Burns, always puts me to sleep.
Yeah.
There's something there.
I mean, how long's he been making those documentaries? Maybe he could come up with something besides a slow pan over a black and white photo.
Right. Well, I don't think jazz needed to be 17 hours long.
But one thing I was kind of, is now with Netflix, Apple TV, they all have a little documentary, when you go to search and things. So is there, are you all seeing more and more of an entertainment content that people are talking about? It's not, I know if y'all talk about causes, it's a great way to tell a story about, some, water quality, the justice and everything like that, but it seems that, I don't know, I see more of it, and talking to friends, it's like, talking about a drama show, but some of these interesting kind of, I call them documentaries about, these people's lives and, the life of these tennis players and things like that, things that you didn't see.
The challenge for people like us is access. So I can't call up Rod Laver and say, I want to come do a story of your long and gloried career, because I don't know him, and I don't have that kind of, credential in my background to do that. People like HBO and Netflix have that. They know it. They've got the I don't want to say credibility, because that's not, but they've got the cojones to make that happen. So that, I think that's a challenge in that world for us. It's just not going to show up. I was trying to think of do you remember the name of the short about that was with the boot or the leg and the.
Oh, yeah.
You want to talk about entertaining.
I haven't seen that. Finders Keepers?
Finders Keepers,
I haven't seen that.
Look that up and you'll laugh here. And it happened in Salisbury, North Carolina.
Finders Keepers.
I think that's a good question. I wasn't giving you a look, but I'm squinting from these licensures.
No, it's not for discussion, it's not a good.
But I think, I think that, that's more of a question. Documentaries can be entertaining. I think a lot of documentary producers really, there's so much entertainment out there that's scripted entertainment, so that's not a documentary, that's not journalistic, it's scripted entertainment, and there's boatloads of that out there. And so I think most documentary producers, I can't speak for them all, but I think want to do something other than entertainment because they want to do something that's important. And not that entertainment's not important, but you know what I mean? There's so much entertainment out there, it's all over every platform. There's documentaries on those platforms, but there's not a lot that you would call entertainment necessarily. And then there's different, there's documentaries that are journalistic, but there is sort of a gray area now I've noticed with some documentaries where, well, yeah, it's almost like, well, yes, this is a true story, but we've kind of manipulated and scripted a little bit here and there. Mm-hmm. And I just don't like that because I think, we live in a world where reality is getting too blurred as it is. I want whatever I do to be truthful. And I want people to know it's truthful and to trust it as truthful. I would love to do some entertainment. I would love to do entertaining documentaries as well. It's just finding the right topic. There's plenty of serious topics out there that are frankly easier to come across. You know, it's hard to find really entertaining documentary topics to me. But I thought Speedo was great. Another one I thought was really great was on American Experience, which I never would have thought would have been a good documentary. I can't remember the name of it. It was about Tupperware. Who'd have thought what a benign topic? It was hugely entertaining and even funny at points.
But I do think one thing that's important to remember with the entertainment value of what we bring is to make sure that what you're producing has the same quality standards or as close to what is being produced by big Hollywood production or whatever the case may be, larger documentary companies. That's one thing that we've always strived for, is to make sure quality-wise that we are matching them as close as we can, even though we're just a mom and pop, you know.
I mean, that's really important that, you know, I think you have to do your best to match that kind of Hollywood kind of quality of production.
Because people expect that. They've seen it now in other things, so now they expect it with what we do as well.
And the good news is the technology has gotten better and cheaper, so it enables small folks like us to produce things that look like that, you know, where the quality is just as good. And so that really is an important point. But, you know, you talk about the quality thing. Is anybody from Capital Broadcasting in here? You know, one of the little things that kind of gave me a little shove to maybe leave was, it was a great company to work for, but they hired a new GM who was very much a, you know, what's a nice way to say bean counter?
I think that was.
But he, you know, sat us down and he wanted us to produce more, and what he gave, you know, was kind of a quota, and he gave us really kind of an unrealistic, you know, and I knew that there's no way we could keep that quota and maintain that quality that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, I could produce a documentary in a week, but it would suck, you know? So he was trying to, so he said when I was talking about, you know, the time we needed to maintain the quality standards that we had come to achieve there, he used that old saying, what is it? Don't let perfection be the enemy of good. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to punch him.
Yeah.
And in fact, when I walked out of the meeting, my boss, this was the GM, my boss said, "I'm sorry he said that." But anyway, any other questions? Anyone?
I was,
Yeah, go ahead.
wondering if any of you all have tried the online streaming things that the younger filmmakers are coming up with. Like, I'm a D-boarder as well, so like the Kinema, and that, have you guys had any experience with that?
I personally have not.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. Always another alternative they come up with to help distribute your own products, and from what I understand, it's uploaded and they kind of help distribute it for you, and you can get a little money off of it.
What's it called again?
Kinema is one of them. It's Kinema.
Okay.
Kinema.
I will check that out. That sounds very
I found out
interesting.
about it through the D-Word, you know, one of the
Yeah.
Friday things that they do.
Cool.
Yeah, I don't do those.
There's just so much. It's hard to know.
It's
which
overwhelming.
way
It can be.
to go.
Yeah, it really is. It's like there's, you know, new platforms every day, it seems like, and so much content. I mean, it's just crazy. So I think that it kind of goes back to finding niches.
Yeah.
Do you guys find that encouraging or discouraging after a long career?
Both. Because I
it's-
remember earlier in my career, you know, like you said earlier, there was like 3 platforms maybe, 4,
Yeah.
whatever, you know, you know, and it's
Movie
like,
theaters.
so yeah, you think, oh, well, here's so many more opportunities to get my work out, but then there's so much more competition. So it's kind of just as hard as it was before, just in a different way.
And I think the documentary access to those streaming platforms and all that is peaked 10 years ago, and it's now going down. And I mean, Netflix, I learned after last year's presentation that, I mean, they'll buy stuff, but they want it to look a certain way. It's got to have drone, you know, They really want to tailor the look of all the documentaries on their platform.
Yeah, now they have a list of only certain cameras are
Yeah.
going to be acceptable.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because they picked one format that's easy to translate around the world, because
Yeah.
they're feeding everybody with your stuff.
Yes, yeah.
One of the most disturbing things we've experienced a few years ago when we were at a film festival was a guy we met who'd gotten his film on Netflix, or a couple of them, and HBO, and had
An
been
earlier
somewhat
film.
had been pretty successful. And then he said he was going to pitch another one, and really what was happening now, and I think this is pretty standard with documentary stuff for the bigger guys now, is like, you can go and you can pitch and you can even have a finished little product, and what they'll do is just give you a little diddly squat amount of money, and you think that that's what's going to happen, is that your film's going to be on, and what they're really doing is taking your idea, and then they go out and they shoot it and produce it all themselves. And so, and it becomes an HBO production, and yours never is even really acknowledged except for a line right there. And so, like, that to us was just like, oh my, you're kidding. So it's that it's so ever-changing at the moment that you can hardly keep up, and what is the best thing to do. So I think, purity of heart is what we're focused on right now. We just, what do we want to do?
Yeah.
And whatever happens to it after that is fine. And, we're getting close to retirement age from day-to-day job kind of stuff, and just trying to figure out, why would we really want to retire now? It's just to make films that are fun. And we'd have to figure out still how to fund certain aspects of it. But then that, again, it's all choices. It just narrows down our choices of what do we really want to focus on. So the whole distribution thing is just crazy.
Yeah.
One experience that I had, and I think I referenced earlier, when we produced this documentary, 6-part documentary series on the James Jordan murder case, which, I've never been a huge fan of the true crime genre, but I've worked as a journalist in the criminal justice system for a long time, so it did kind of interest me. But when we were trying to get it sold to Amazon or Netflix or whoever, and we were working with Bow and Arrow Media in LA, they came out, we had a meeting with them, and I'll never forget their producer who's going to be in charge of getting it to Amazon, said, he was talking about, because I think at the time they were thinking they were going to continue to do that. Capital Broadcasting was going to continue to try to be a production company that would supply content for Amazon or Netflix or whoever. But he said to me, and this was discouraging, he said, come up with some topics, and one thing you need to know is dysfunction sells. So, and I found that to be very discouraging. So they want, the serial killer and, just the weirdest stories possible, not necessarily the most important stories. I found that really discouraging. So, but we should end on a positive note.
Yeah, that would be good.
We've got an aerial workshop that we're getting ready to start next,
okay.
so I'm going to go help Cher set up.
Okay. Any other
And then
questions,
I'll see you later
folks?
this afternoon for another. So please, anybody who wants to learn about aerial cinematography,
Very
will be
good.
downstairs in the pavilion.
Yeah.
Are you flying inside?
We could, but we're not.
All right. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, guys.